Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. Today, I'm excited to talk a little bit about continuous penetration testing and how organizations can evolve to meet the constant set of new threats that are on onslaught from malicious actors, leveraging generative AI, leveraging automation, leveraging new ways to identify zero-day attacks and compromise organizations, how to get greater insights into your security posture on a real-time basis rather than a snapshot basis, as well as talk about some practical tips and techniques for implementing continuous security testing across the organization with specific tooling. And as usual of my standard format, I'll talk about some open source tools that might be helpful in that process. But before I do that, I wanted to provide everyone just a little bit about myself, Christian Scott here, as well as our team here at Plurilock. So I'm Christian Scott. I am our practice lead of offensive cybersecurity. I have a background in about 25 years experience in penetration testing, red teaming, purple teaming, all types of cybersecurity risk assessments, be it traditional, cloud infrastructure based, so on and so forth. And in a lot of my free time, I like to contribute to the open source community and the cybersecurity community, trying to provide insights into the mindset of malicious actors and how they break into organizations. Our team here at Plurilock, while we do have quite the practice around offensive cybersecurity, we're also an elite cybersecurity strike team that helps organizations and agencies across the domains of zero trust, intellectual property protection, security modernization, and more. Now, I have up on screen our portal in which we do a little bit of security, continuous security testing work through and all of that. But before we do that, I really want to set kind of the context, the frame of reference of, you know, why there's the impetus for organizations to consider moving closer and closer and closer to a continuous security testing methodology and threat modeling methodology, be it if they're leveraging a cybersecurity partner or they're doing it internally, right? It's, I think, no surprise to anybody that with generative AI in the last about 2 to 3 years, that has really been leveraged by malicious actors and allowing them to compromise more organizations at scales and also to conduct ever increasingly sophisticated attacks at a lower and lower barrier to entry, because that generative AI can help with various things like, creating malware, right? Or deepfake content or phishing content or other types of fraud, right? That can assist them in a campaign that, either is focusing on technical vulnerabilities or weaknesses, or vulnerabilities and weaknesses that might be inherent to, human beings within the organization department structure, authorization processes around the organization, and then once gaining a foothold, continuing lateral movement from there. That being said, most organizations, at one point or another throughout their existence will conduct a pen test, and in many instances will conduct annual pen testing engagements. And I want to kind of just set a frame of reference of, what a pen test is, what social engineering testing is, what red teaming is, just from a high level. And then also then start to kind of talk about that impetus of like, how can we realistically, increase the cadence of getting better and better insights on, what a threat actor can do with our organization, what they can see with our organization, and at the same time, keeping that in a reasonable, boundaries of cost considerations and resource utilization for the organization, because, obviously someone can't necessarily increase their, let's say, pen testing budget by 10x, right? That's just not feasible or realistic, right? So, that being said, when it comes to malicious actors and leveraging, generative AI, particularly one of the ways in which they are becoming ever increasingly more sophisticated is it allows them to understand the threat model of an organization and its attack surface faster than ever, right? So in conjunction with um, conventional open source intelligence and reconnaissance tools, now with generative AI agents to summarize those data sets, to look for artifacts that would indicate that there might be interesting vulnerabilities and weaknesses to look at, that allows them to, rather than threat model an organization, understand its security posture, maybe, once or twice throughout a year or once a quarter, right? And putting in some level of effort into that process. Now more than ever, that is really being reduced down. And better yet, right, what malicious actors tend to do is now leveraging not just a lot of conventional vulnerability scanners that, sometimes are also used by white hat cybersecurity professionals. So tools like OpenVAS and Nuclei and Sniper, so on and so forth. But then again, in combination with those generative AI agents, being able to kind of infer like what's the next steps based off of that uh, dossier on the organization and its initial attack surface, what vulnerabilities and weaknesses might be able to be exploited. This has particularly been kind of accelerated over the last couple months with new generative AI interfaces like MCP, which MCP, for all intents and purposes, this protocol that's used for generative AI models allows organizations, and it's an open source protocol, allows organizations to interface their generative AI agents or agentic frameworks with various tools to request a piece of information, get back some type of output, so on and so forth. So with using MCP and other interfaces, malicious actors can tie together those conventional cybersecurity tools to an agentic framework, make some type of decision, right? And then commit some particular action off of that, right? And so malicious actors more and more and more now, right, are leveraging, okay, maybe the information or insights that came out of an open VOS or a nuclei scan to then next step automatically attempt something like a SQL injection attack, right, on what looks to be an insecure web application or something like that, right? So there's that aspect, right, in the reconnaissance and open source intelligence phase, that malicious actors now have faster insights on what is going on. And then on top of that, malicious actors, once they've identified maybe a vulnerability or a weakness, usually in the past, a decade ago, it would take a fair amount of degree of like looking at a particular maybe CVE or a theoretical vulnerability and then poking and prodding it the right way to engineer a remote code execution payload, right? That might be successful enough to be able to, establish a remote shell and session to the compromised system, right? Now, what malicious actors are doing in conjunction with a lot of these agentic frameworks, and there's obviously commercially available ones, but there's also open source ones. DeepSeek is probably one of the most popular open source agentic models and frameworks that people tend to use. That's higher quality, and malicious actors conversely as well. Is that it allows for doing malware or reverse engineering and malware development much faster than ever, right? So being able to identify, okay, there seems to be some set of vulnerabilities and weaknesses here that alone in themselves isn't a significant threat to that, web application or to the underlying servers of that web application, but now combined together and combined with an AI agent that can do some research, that can develop payloads, right, can exploit that faster than ever and execute a true kill chain, right? So that means that, conversely, organizations, that one-time annual pen testing approach really needs to now kind of be adapted to being more like, rather than that snapshot, right, a continuous basis of keeping your fingers on the pulse. And it's a balance because the fact of the matter is that, conventional vulnerability scanners that are out there, right, leave a lot, right, to be desired because at the end of the day, malicious actors don't tend to look at an organization through the lens of the vulnerabilities and the CVSS score of the vulnerabilities, right? What they tend to look at is what's the practical likelihood of exploitation, what's the rest of the defense and death posture look like, as in, are there compensating controls? So yes, there might be some vulnerability and there might be some particular CVE that's a CVSS score of 6 or something like that on this web server, but do they also have the web application firewall in place, right? Is this going to be worth our time and effort to try to obfuscate, our remote code execution attempts and that kind of stuff, right, to compromise that web server and trying to get around that web application firewall, so on and so forth, right? So vulnerability scanners, they provide a boatload of information about all these vulnerabilities, all these weaknesses, and all these CVSS scores, but it's not always practical, right, for enterprise from an enterprise risk management strategy of what is truly exploitable by malicious actors, what would be the actual impact, what are the compensating controls that we have, right, that hopefully provide some level of underlying compensating controls and barriers, right, that help kind of make up for exploitation or reduce the potentiality of exploitation. And do we have the facilities in place to detect potential exploitation, right, or the attempts of exploitation and true exploitation, and being able to react to it in a timely manner, right? So enterprise risk management and vulnerability scanners don't tend to mix. So a lot of organizations still depend on your conventional penetration testing engagements to really understand, well, what's practical from a hacker's perspective. This way, rather than getting a vulnerability scan that says that you have 10,000 vulnerabilities and weaknesses, right? It's like, okay, these are the top 10 things we need to focus on. These are the top 10 things a hacker can actually do to our organization, right? And set things on fire tomorrow. Okay. And that then drives home a remediation strategy, right? And that remediation strategy being, okay, we're going to focus on getting this fixed here, this fixed here, this fixed here, and then we'll re-engage, right, later on to retest things. Unfortunately, I think that pen testing and vulnerability scanning over the years has been intermingled, and to a certain degree in which a lot of pen testing firms out there perform just an enhanced vulnerability scan. They are just using a Nessus vulnerability scanner, right, and putting it into a different format, but not actually attempting any true exploitation. They're only focusing on IP addresses and port numbers. They're not necessarily looking at other things like, DNS vulnerabilities and subdomain takeover attacks, or unintentionally exposed cloud infrastructure, or unintentionally exposed information like a data leakage vulnerability because somebody was putting information on the back end of their website and they didn't realize that wasn't protected. Like, a lot of those lower quality pen tests won't see those things that a malicious actor will see, right? So there's, again, that balance there. So some kind of tips and considerations for organizations to kind of start implementing a continuous pen testing strategy and approach, right? Be it if they're doing it internally on themselves, right, or they're starting to leverage a partner. These are going to be some of the aspects that we're going to deep dive into here in a moment. But one of the first starting points I always like to ask somebody is, do you have a bug bounty program in place? Do you have, right, a security.txt that's hosted on your website? And a lot of people go, what's a security.txt? Or, why should I have a bug bounty program? Well, at the end of the day, even if your organization isn't necessarily, at the maturity level where you can, issue out like monetary rewards for any type of bug bounty disclosures or anything like that, if your organization has a fairly significant presence on the internet, it behooves you, right, to have a security.txt file, which is basically like the standard for communicating that if a security researcher happens to discover a vulnerability or weakness with your organization, or maybe some products or services that you have, or might be even things like physical hardware that you create as an organization, if it's let's say a business to consumer organization, that there is a approved channel for communicating and disclosing vulnerabilities and weaknesses to you, right? This way, when there are legitimate things found by cybersecurity researchers, right, that are in their free time, just curious folks, right, and they happen to come across your organization, they happen to come across one of your products or services, and they see a vulnerability, they can get that information to you as quickly as possible, right, so that you can triage that, understand, okay, what's the practical likelihood of exploitation and impact of this vulnerability or weakness that was just disclosed to us, right? And then being able to address it in a timely manner, right? So the security TXT file, again, allows you to say, hey, look, if you see anything about us, right, or any vulnerabilities or weaknesses in our products or services, this is how you can reach out to us. This is the best way to communicate, so on and so forth. There are tons and tons of bug bounty sites and programs and even portfolio sites, right, that'll list all the bug bounty sites, right? It behooves an organization to usually participate, right, by having, hey, look, you now have vulnerability disclosure process and program and a security TXT file, right? Put yourself on a bug bounty site, right? Put yourself into one of those programs. Even if there is not a monetary reward, what you're helping doing is incentivizing that there's at least white hat cybersecurity researchers, right? They can poke and prod around, right? They can take a look around and they can at least get some quote unquote reputational points, right? With looking at your organization, your security posture, communicating that back to you, right? So that's a good starting point for most organizations is, okay, now we have more than just one source from a singular cybersecurity partner who's doing a pen test once a year. Now we have a vulnerability disclosure program. We have people who can funnel insights to us, and we can get that insight and information and react to it as appropriate, right? Another big aspect that I like to communicate to people is that, you know, while this particular session is not necessarily about all the blue team defensive controls, right? When we talk about AI threats and becoming more sophisticated and, particularly around like deepfake attacks, right, it is probably behooves you to also update your incident response testing plans, playbooks, strategy, and approach to incorporate that, to be not necessarily just as nimble as a malicious actor with leveraging AI, right? But to become more nimble and adaptable, right? And in the future, right, as you go to engage in penetration testing engagements, right? Be it if you're leveraging, again, a third-party partner, right, or you're doing that internally, is focusing not just on the vulnerabilities and weaknesses that are being discovered, but also what was our capability from an incident response standpoint to be able to detect the attempts of reconnaissance on our organization, attempt or detect attempts on exploiting various vulnerabilities and weaknesses, right? This way, you're able to then get insights into the efficacy of your incident response processes and program and improve that at the same time, right? So two birds, one stone. So in one of the previous webinars that we had talking about the power of purple teaming, really what we were doing was talking about taking the insights from the red team, right, of emulating a malicious adversary, right, and breaking into an organization and mixing that with our blue team, right, the security operations center team, right, the technology team who are the defenders, right, in which we can see the attack was attempted. Did we see it? And if we did, how did we respond? That's really important to continue to kind of incorporate those components into your pen testing engagements. Because if you're going to be doing it, might as well extract as much value out of it as possible, right? This way you can differentiate the insights that you're getting from a typical vulnerability scan that you can get from an open source vulnerability scanner like OpenVAS and Nuclei and all that kind of stuff versus, right, a real pen testing engagement where we're really trying to emulate a threat actor targeting our organization, right? One of the common items I tend to talk about with organizations very frequently, in updating their incident response playbooks in conjunction with the regular pen testing engagements, sometimes mixed with social engineering testing, right? Or very frequently actually mixed with social engineering testing is, okay, also, right, deep fakes, how to detect them, how to report them, and all that kind of stuff. Okay, well, what type of defensive measures do we want to plan on incorporating into the organization later on. Okay, well, let's first start with training staff members, making sure that they're well informed of that, right? And then after they're well informed about, that type of technology exists, and to just generally be, on the lookout, right? Okay, well, now let's start looking at implementing solutions like Microsoft Entra ID, right? Particularly, actually, no, Microsoft Entra Verified ID face check. Microsoft always has a billion different names for everything, which makes it even more fun. But that being said, which is already integrated, right, essentially in the Microsoft Authenticator app on people's phones that they use for MFA all the time. This way, right, somebody can, let's say, be able to not just authenticate, but also prove themselves, right, for like things like help desk calls, right? Or when interacting with like human resources and things like that, right? So again, when we talk about continuous security testing, we really, really also want to relate it not just to, our enterprise risk management strategy, but our incident response capabilities, right? All the way from, the planning, right? And training and having people informed and implementing defensive controls through then detection, identification, and containment, right? So that being noted, there are a lot of fun tools out there that organizations can start to leverage internally. On our Purple Teaming webinar last week, one of the big tools that I talked about was Miter Caldera. It's one of my personal favorites. And while I don't necessarily consider that a direct replacement for Purple Teaming, it definitely provides a lot of is a direct replacement for conventional pen testing. It definitely provides a lot of great Purple Teaming insights for organizations and doing security testing, particularly of scenarios that are post-breach scenarios. So if we already started with a compromised workstation or a compromised server, what can a malicious actor continue to do when it comes to establishing persistence and escalating their privilege levels on that local system, and then attempting lateral movement to other servers and workstations and network infrastructure across the environment, that type of stuff, right? It also behooves organizations to start to get that information all into one place, all into one portal. So a lot of times, again, unfortunately, many vulnerability scanners, they're happy to throw reports at you. They're happy to have dashboards, but looking through 1,000 results is just fundamentally very, very challenging for folks. You really need to kind of boil it down to, what are the main plans of action, right? That's going to be tackling the top 10 big problems, right? And then prioritizing the rest of the risks, right, to your standard SLAs of, this should be addressed in 60 days, 90 days. This might be this item that's low enough severity, might be risk acceptable, and we're just going to track for it, all that type of stuff. And so I tend to recommend that folks have a portal or a solution in place. There's a lot of really great solutions out there for organizations that are doing internal security testing, and then they're trying to aggregate all that risk data into one place. A couple of those being one of my favorites is the from the OWASP project. This is one of the flagship projects. It's called Defect Dojo. Defect Dojo is a fantastic solution. And certainly I've actually I leverage that very much in the past for organizations. What we have here on screen is a solution that's similar, although a commercial offering. But there are also other solutions that are out there. Another one that was very close to my heart that I created quite a few plugins for in the past is also Dratus, right? So these are open source, essentially, security testing reporting solutions that can ingest a lot of data from all the different vulnerability scans or all the different, pen tests that you do and all the different tools that you have, right? Deduplicate it into one place, into one registry, right? Associate that to a particular locality. So this is for a web application. This is our external network, our internal network, right? And then being able to say, okay, now that we've deduplicated all these, let's prioritize them and then associate a plan of action, right, to, our top 10 priorities, so on and so forth, right? So That all being said, I'm going to turn to our portal that we have here. I'm going to just talk a little bit about kind of how we do continuous security testing, right? My hope is that this serves as a illustration, right, for anyone who's kind of looking to create something, similar in-house, or if you are looking to have a cybersecurity partner help you with continuous pen testing. What are some of those aspects, right, that you should, be really kind of looking for from them? One of the first aspects I say for most folks is this: look, you don't have to do, we don't always have to be your cybersecurity partner, but there are some kind of baseline levels that you want to look for in a cybersecurity partner, which is if you're looking to work with a cybersecurity partner, it's going to be doing things like penetration testing and social engineering testing and that kind of stuff. At this point in juncture, right, they should have obviously a fantastic customer experience where you're working with human beings all the time and they're providing you updates on what's happening and all that kind of stuff, but also a portal so that you can see all the information in one place, what's going on at any given moment. This way, you don't have to rely on just manual status updates or just rely on a PDF report that you receive 2 to 4 weeks later, right, after an engagement starts, right? You should be able to see the progression of what's being done in real time and who is doing it and what tools are being leveraged and the evidence and the newly discovered vulnerabilities and weaknesses, so on and so forth, right? So again, doesn't have to be this portal, right? But somebody, if you're working with a cybersecurity partner at this juncture, right, it behooves you that they have the capabilities, right, of being able to express cybersecurity insights to you and to your team, right, in an easily digestible manner and format. So, taking a look here, we're logged into our cybersecurity testing portal. This is where we do a lot of our engagements for folks, and we have the opportunity of earning their business, including doing a lot of penetration testing engagements, but also red teaming, purple teaming engagements, as well as cybersecurity risk assessments. We have the opportunity of helping folks on many different types of cadences, be it if it's we're doing one big security assessment or test or pen test a year, right? And then we're there to get together with them on a monthly cadence and basis to talk about like, this is the remediation strategy and this is how you can go fix those things. And you want to sit down and talk to our engineers, and then we can kind of retest and whatnot. This way, at least if you're getting that one big test a year that you're paying for, the next year it rolls around that there's been a substantial improvement, right, in reducing the amount of risks that it had been discovered, right, and also being able to see an improvement of your security posture, right? So look, this was 2024, this was 2025. Look at how substantially better it is, right? I think one of the things that has really been forgotten about with a lot of pen testing firms is they go, oh, my job's to find a bunch of problems. So they find a bunch of problems, they dump a bunch of problems into somebody's plate with a PDF. Somebody gets the PDF and they go, great. Can I get some guidance though, beyond just the generic recommendations that you have in here? Can we sit down after the fact? Can you sit down with my engineers and talk to them? Can you sit down with my infrastructure guys and talk to them? Can you kind of guide us through this, that, and the other thing? So that's really, really important. And I think that's kind of one of the, beyond the ability to see the changes of the organization's attack surface in real time and security posture in real time, just like a threat actor would, right? There's also being able to reduce the mean time to remediation, right? And so in our portal here, we're looking at the same exact kind of perspective of a regular customer we had the opportunity to earn in the business of. We could see all the different types of analytics associated with, they got 4 projects going on across 5 assets, 15 vulnerabilities. We could see the kind of status of all the vulnerabilities at one quick glance. Obviously the severity level all the way from critical through low, right? But what I really, really love about this is we can see, again, that mean time to remediation, right? So we can really understand, okay, how fast are we getting to, solving the challenges that might be associated with the critical risks that have been identified, right? And that then gives us an understanding of, okay, are we within the terms of our like SLA that we have set for our vulnerability and risk management program? or are we outside of that? And if we're outside of that, or we're starting to get close to being outside of that, then we know that we need to kind of focus on improving, the underlying root cause to what's slowing that down. Being able to quickly see at a glance the common vulnerabilities and weaknesses that might exist across the organization and its systems, the most vulnerable assets, right? And then how long these risks have been open for on average, right? This way, again, we can kind of see what's the mean time to remediation usually look like, and is it improving or is it getting worse, right? Um, and so this is really, really great, because what this allows us to do is this allows us to say, from just a 10,000-foot view perspective, what's the health of the organization look like in regards to, is it getting to a better place or is it getting to a worse place? We can even do some like really, really quick comparisons. So like, hey, we're just going to compare like, um, you know, uh, Q4 of last year to Q1 of this year, right? And then when we apply that, right? Okay, cool. I can quickly see at a glance, okay, well, it looks like we're in a worse situation and going into Q1 of 2025 than of Q4 2024 in regards to, there are more open risks than ever, right? We haven't completed any retests yet. And it looks like we're discovering more high severity risks compared more recently compared to late last year, right? So again, this allows your CISOs and your CTOs and your CIOs to really make more informed decisions at a 10,000-foot view perspective of going, oh wow, okay, I can see that things are going in a good direction or a not so good direction. And if it's that latter case, then being able to action on that sooner rather than later, right? So a lot of times an organization, when they kind of think about the cadence of, how is their security posture improving, they do it through just the one lens of the one pen test that happens every single year. And the problem with that is, by the time they realize that not much has gotten better or has gotten worse or not much has actually improved, right? An entire year has passed of all that time to improve the security posture. And that's all that time of also being potentially exposed, right? And potentially, getting compromised by a malicious actor, right? Because you really haven't made any substantial improvements to burn down those risks, right? So, we love to have it where anytime we're collaborating with somebody, they get access to our portal. They can see all the projects going on, when they're going on, and every phase. When you're a more complex organization, you have more than just one locality to think about. Our network, right? There's what's our cloud, infrastructure look like in Azure? What does the traditional external network security posture look like, and the internal network security posture look like? And maybe we want to do an assessment that's like on our endpoints in regards to like a ransomware test, or we want to make sure we're doing social engineering testing. So there's all these different types of things that might have to be kind of tracked for in their own buckets, right? As their own kind of quote unquote projects per se, right? And for many instances, an organization might have a set of like web applications, and they might have like, I got 10 web applications. Well, you can't have that just in one big report, right? And then that one big report, you share it with the 10 different software development teams. They get confused by it, right? So what's really, really cool with our portal and solution here is that, this just comes with all of our, offensive security testing services, right? There's no like additional costs or anything like that. And there's no like per user fees. There's no user count limits. We just invite whomever is needed. And then there's role-based access control that can then be applied to each one of these engagements. So, okay, we're going to be doing a risk assessment on AWS. So just the cloud infrastructure team, plus obviously the CISO, who can see everything, right, have access to this project. So they can myopically focus on this, while, maybe, our traditional network infrastructure folks, they can only see the external internal pen testing engagements that have been done on the network, right? And when an engagement occurs, right, what's really, really important is not just defining of the vulnerabilities and weaknesses. So, we have this one that's about to start out here and all that kind of stuff. But more importantly, being able to demonstrate like whoever was doing that security test, right, be it if it's a black box penetration testing engagement, or it's some type of white box security risk assessment, or it's some type of gray box in between security tests, is, well, what are the test cases? Like, what was actually done, and can you show me the evidence of that, right? So like, oh, okay, this AWS cloud risk assessment here, this is lined up to CIS controls. Okay, great. So we can see basically, the AWS CIS controls, and then we can go into each thing that has been tested. So this is the test case, right? We can see that this is for CIS and AWS foundations, right? Here are the details of what was tested or looked for, right? And the associated like recommendation, right, on that particular or topic reference, right, on this test case. That's really, really important. Not just to say like, oh yeah, there's 20 vulnerabilities, there's 20 weaknesses, there's 20 things that you need to be concerned about. Okay, well, what about all the other things that we looked at? Right? Where do we look good? Where do we look healthy? Right? So like out of like a quote unquote kind of like inspection, a multi-point inspection of the organization or the locality, did we get 50 points correct out of 100, or do we get 0 points correct out of 100? And a lot of times when someone receives a pen testing report or some type of other offensive security testing report, just talks about problems, but it doesn't necessarily elaborate or provide any context to where maybe things looked good, or there was robust compensating controls in place, like, oh yeah, you have web application firewalls here, here, and here. You had an intrusion prevention system that kept blocking us here, here, and here, making it really challenging for us. Like, those are all aspects that should be captured from an evidentiary standpoint, right? So when we're talking about doing continuous security testing, and we have that link to essentially an immutable reference of test cases and what the methodology that was leveraged there, now we have like a chain of trust of being able to see later on, if their malicious actor does exploit something in a production environment, that kind of stuff, we can go and we can say to ourselves, wait, did we test for that thing? Did we look for that thing? Were we thorough enough in the past? Right. And we can go back to that immutable set of records and evidence, say, oh no, we missed that thing, or we weren't thorough enough. Right. That provides the opportunity for improving the offensive security testing or the white box security testing that might be employed in engagements in the future. Right. And again, those engagements, they might be able to be done like annually with retesting support, or it might be quarterly, or it might be monthly, or it might be, weekly, right? And this way someone has not just one annual snapshot, but they're able to keep their fingers on the pulse, and they can kind of combine what things have, be able to see, how the security posture is evolving over time. And, even from a conventional standpoint, maybe someone still has like a pen test once a year, right? And now they're in that phase of like, okay, we're going to retest and we're going to provide insight on the remediation process and whatnot. Well, it's important to be able to say like, hey, I want you to go retest this. Well, having to kind of converse that manually, be it if it's internally within your organization, you're doing the security testing, or through a ticketing or conventional ticketing system, or you're doing that with a cybersecurity partner via email, right? It's much, much easier to be able to orchestrate that, right, through a portal and a solution, like I've mentioned, like Defect Dojo and Traders and all that kind of stuff, where someone can quickly see like, oh, okay, so this cross-site scripting vulnerability weakness that was exploited, right? We've since fixed it. Can you guys go retest it? Yes, we just retested it. It looks like it's not actually quite fixed yet. You need to go back and go do XYZ. Okay, cool. We're going to go back and get it fixed. And once they, believe they've had it fixed, they can then put in another retest request, right? So it's an immutable record and ledger being able to see, okay, well, we've seen problems. We have now triaged the problems to a plan of action. And now that we're executing on that plan of action, we can see that the retests are occurring, and we can see that the security posture is now in a better place, right? So rather than just, again, seeing that one-time snapshot approach, someone's able to see that improvement over time. Now, of course, obviously, someone's able to see all the great information that might be associated with a vulnerability or weakness and evidence of exploitation and all that fun stuff, right? But it's that real deep focus on being able to, help reduce the mean time to remediation that's really, really important. Also, it allows folks to be able to communicate like, hey, right now with these vulnerabilities open, right? Like this is the kill chain that can be executed by a malicious actor, or this is the kill chain that our team was able to accomplish, right? Breaking into these systems, so on and so forth, right? That's a really, really important to be able to demonstrate so that essentially the product owner, the system owners, right? They understand the gravitas of those associated security findings, being able to prioritize them appropriately and address them in a timely manner, right? Um, What's also really, really cool that I particularly like about our portal is, someone can also see like in a quick monthly view, like, oh, these are all the engagements, these are all the projects that are going on, right? And this is what's coming up and all that kind of stuff. Okay, cool. So we're doing our external pen testing right now. And then, oh, right after that, we got the AWS Cloud Risk Assessment that's coming in. Okay. And we can see, oh, we can see who's working on it. That's great. So, we know that we're working with Christian, and this test user that we're in right now is Bugs Bunny, if you're not able to tell. And so it's important to also be able to see like who's actually working on this engagement. And so when you are requesting a retest or you need assistance with something, that it's the same people who have that like institutional knowledge who had previously, has done that big lift of a pen test and that kind of stuff. Um, it's also, again, really, really helpful to have test cases. As you can kind of see, there's a couple different ones that might be, so we got this 29 out of 385, right? But these test cases can align to different frameworks and different requirements. So I previously showed that in the AWS Cloud Risk Assessment, right, that was aligned to the AWS CIS Cloud Foundation controls, right? In this particular case, we can see that this external network pen test is being done in conjunction with the MITRE ATT&CK framework, right? And then we can see, the details of what was attempted and when it was attempted and all that kind of stuff and what tools, can be leveraged in that process and all that kind of stuff, right? And of course, having the ability to have that data go into other places. So yeah, one can download a report, download a CSV and all that kind of stuff, but even more importantly, can we integrate this with like our Jira environment, or one of our other risk management solutions and systems? So I also would say that anytime where you're building either in-house a continuous pen testing program or continuous security testing program, or you're looking to partner up with somebody, asking them, do they have APIs in place, right, that support the ability of shipping that information to your organization's, vulnerability management system if you have one, right? Again, like Jira, right? And then when someone marks something off as completed, or that issue's fixed, it automatically opens up a retest. Like that's really important so that we can make risk management more like a business as usual process that's closer to the rest of the organization's technology and cybersecurity stack rather than being just another portal that someone has to log into. Integrating the data pipelines, right, around our security remediation processes is really, really, really important, right? Um, and then lastly, being able to just see, from a 10,000-foot view perspective, okay, here are all the major, security findings at a glance, regardless of the particular project or locality. And again, you might have it where an organization has a complex departmental structure where there's a group of developers and a product team that oversees, these 5 web applications, and there's another group of developers and a product team that oversees, these APIs over here, and there's another group of developers and a product team that oversees the mobile application. And then the CISO and the rest of the cybersecurity team, they need to be able to see everything in one place, right? So having the ability to set granular role-based access control on like a per project and a per asset basis is really, really important to consider when you're selecting, potential, again, either cybersecurity partners or you're looking to build out your own portal and solution leveraging some open source tools out there, because this way, you're not overexposing, certain developers or certain teams to information that's really not kind of pertinent to their particular role or position within the organization, that kind of stuff, right? While at the same time, too, the CISO is able to get the insight that they need and understanding the organization's security posture from a 100-foot or from like a 10,000-foot view perspective. So to that, um, this webinar has been a fantastic kind of go through talking about continuous security testing, continuous penetration testing. Again, this is very much in conjunction with some of the aspects I've already previously covered on some of our other webinars, like our purple teaming webinar that I highly recommend taking a gander at if you have some free time, if you haven't already. And that being said, we'll have many more webinars on the horizon, so please keep your eye out for more in the near future here. Thank you so much.